Title: Poor single mom boarded the wrong flight, didn't know the man sitting beside her was the lonely CEO. She had $23 left in her wallet, a tear-stained boarding pass clutched in her trembling hand, and no idea she was boarding the wrong flight. Her toddler son was asleep in her lap, breathing softly, unaware of the chaos his mother had just endured. The overhead lights in the terminal glared down on her like judgmental eyes. Her heart pounded as the final boarding call echoed through the airport, and she sprinted forward, not realizing she was about to change the rest of her life. That flight wasn't heading to Atlanta like her ticket said. It was bound for Seattle. But fate had already taken the controls, and the seat next to hers wasn't empty. It was reserved for a man who had forgotten what it felt like to be needed. A man who hadn't smiled in months. A man whose name was whispered in boardrooms and business magazines, but meant nothing in the lonely halls of his penthouse. Before we go deeper into this emotional journey, please don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe to Royal Stories if you believe in kindness, second chances, and the power of unexpected connections. Your support helps us keep telling stories that matter. She was 31, with tired eyes that had once held dreams. Her name was Claire, and her world revolved around a 3-year-old boy named Micah, who called her Mama, with more love than anyone else ever had. Life hadn't been gentle. Her husband had walked out the moment she told him about the pregnancy, leaving her in a cold apartment with unpaid bills and no plan. She had worked as a waitress, a cleaner, and once even stood outside a department store dressed as a dancing coffee cup just to earn enough to buy Micah his asthma medication. They had slept in shelters, on church floors, and sometimes in bus terminals, where she'd keep one eye open all night just to make sure her baby didn't vanish in the dark. When she received the letter from her cousin in Atlanta offering a couch and a part-time babysitting job, Claire cried. It wasn't perfect, but it was hope. She scraped together every coin she had, sold her only piece of jewelry, her mother's locket, and booked the cheapest flight she could find. She didn't check the gate twice. She was too exhausted, too broken. And when the flight attendant scanned her ticket and waved her through, Claire believed, for once, that maybe things were starting to turn around. The man in seat 3A didn't look like someone who ever sat in economy. His name was Nathaniel Quinn. He was 43, tall, sharply dressed, with cold blue eyes that rarely met anyone else's. His tailored charcoal gray suit, polished shoes, and Rolex watch screamed power. But the lines around his mouth told a different story, one of silence and solitude. He was the CEO of a billion-dollar tech firm, hailed as a genius by the world, and entirely alone behind the walls of glass offices and driver-partitioned limousines. His parents had passed early. His marriage had crumbled. He had no children, no close friends. Even his assistants spoke to him in hushed tones, as though afraid to wake the ghost inside him. Business was all he had. Emotion was a currency he'd forgotten how to spend. Claire, with her messy bun and faded jeans, didn't belong next to him, not in his world. But when she boarded with Micah in her arms, looking flustered and frightened, the flight attendant didn't ask questions. She ushered her into seat 3B. Claire thought it strange she had been assigned business class, but she was too grateful to question it. She nestled Micah against her chest and sat down beside the intimidating man who gave her a brief glance before turning back to his tablet. As the plane ascended, Micah stirred, coughed, and whimpered in his sleep. Claire gently hushed him, pulling a thin baby blanket over his shoulders. Nathaniel shifted, annoyed at first, until he glanced over again. There was something about the way Claire held the child, the way her fingers trembled, the way her lips pressed against his forehead like she was the only shield he had from the world. Nathaniel's heart, unused and dusty, twitched. Halfway through the flight, turbulence shook the cabin, and Micah began to cry. Claire, flustered and humiliated, tried soothing him with an empty juice bottle and soft humming. That's when Nathaniel did something even he didn't expect. He reached over and offered a small plush keychain that had been attached to his briefcase. It was a silly thing, a promotional item from years ago. But Mika's sobs lessened as he clutched it, and Claire gave Nathaniel a look that held 1,000 silent thank yous. She didn't know who he was. That was refreshing. Nathaniel found himself asking her questions, softly at first. She told him bits and pieces, that she was a single mom, that life had been hard, that she was flying to Atlanta for a new beginning. She didn't mention how she hadn't eaten in 24 hours or that her shoes were too tight because they weren't hers. She didn't cry when she spoke, but Nathaniel saw the shimmer in her eyes. The more she spoke, the more his silence cracked. When the flight landed, Claire gathered Micah and thanked him again for his kindness. But as they entered the terminal, a cruel realization struck her: this wasn't Atlanta. Panic hit. She clutched Micah tighter, looked around in frantic disbelief, and collapsed onto a bench in tears. The gate sign read Seattle. She had boarded the wrong flight. She had no money, no phone credit, and nowhere to go. She couldn't afford another mistake. Nathaniel hadn't left the terminal. He had a car waiting, an assistant texting him updates. But something made him turn back. He spotted her curled on the bench, shielding Micah from the cold draft, and something in his soul shattered. Without hesitation, he approached, knelt beside her, and asked where she needed to go. When she told him about Atlanta, he stood in silence for a moment, then said, "Come with me." He brought her to a hotel, not the penthouse, just a safe, warm suite. He arranged for fresh clothes and food. She didn't want charity. But this wasn't charity. It was something else. He didn't try to impress her. He didn't speak much. He just helped. And every time Claire looked into his eyes, she felt something neither of them could name, like her pain had been recognized by someone who had long buried his own. In the days that followed, Nathaniel quietly rearranged meetings and cleared his schedule. He visited the hotel daily, sometimes with toys for Micah, sometimes with just silence to sit beside Claire as she figured out her next steps. He helped rebook her flight. But he didn't rush her. Not once. The day before her new flight, Claire walked into his office, invited, not summoned. She had Micah with her. She placed a hand on Nathaniel's desk and thanked him. Then she looked him in the eye and said, "No one's ever looked at me like I matter. Thank you for seeing me." Nathaniel stood still for a long time after they left. He knew something inside him had changed. That night, he made a call to cancel her flight. He chartered a new one, to Atlanta, but this time, he went with her. Weeks passed. Then months. Nathaniel visited more often. Eventually, Claire stopped being surprised by the way he looked at Micah, like the boy was his own. One morning, Micah ran into his arms without hesitation, and Nathaniel held him like he had always been waiting for that moment. Eventually, Nathaniel asked Claire to stay, not because she needed help, but because he did. He didn't want to return to a life of sterile offices and silent dinners. He wanted laughter, messy mornings, toy-strewn hallways, and someone to call home. Claire hesitated. She had been hurt too deeply before. But one night, when she found a note under Mika's pillow that said, "I love Mr. Nate because he loves you, Mama," she knew it was time to open her heart. They didn't marry right away. They built a life first. They laughed, healed, and grew, together. Claire found her strength again. Nathaniel found his joy. In Micah, he found not one, but two people who would walk through fire for him. If this story touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe to Royal Stories. We tell true feeling stories for real souls. Comment below if you believe that even a wrong turn can lead to the right destination. Speech balloon special request. Comment, "I believe in second chances," if you felt something while reading. Let's fill the comments with hope. Absolutely. Let's continue this deeply emotional and inspiring journey, developing it further with more heartfelt scenes, tension, and eventual healing, keeping the tone cinematic and real. Nathaniel Quinn had spent years mastering the language of mergers and acquisitions, of profits and projections. But no one had ever taught him how to read the silence between a mother and her child when they shared a meal of microwave soup in a hotel room, or how to interpret the tiny giggle that slipped from a child who hadn't laughed in days. Those moments were foreign currency in his world, but they began to mean more than the millions he managed every day. Claire, for the first time in years, didn't feel invisible. Nathaniel didn't look at her with pity or agenda, he listened. When she spoke of her dreams, small, modest things like going back to school or starting a mobile hair salon, he didn't scoff or wave them off. He asked questions, helped her research, even drew out business models in a notebook he usually used for tech strategies. For every doubt she voiced, he countered with belief. But not everything was smooth. Word began to spread in Nathaniel's world. Photos were taken, of him carrying Micah on his shoulders through a Christmas market, of Claire walking beside him with a soft smile that said she finally felt safe. His board members raised questions. His PR team panicked. A single mom from nowhere didn't fit the image they had cultivated around him. And Claire felt the weight of that pressure. She overheard a conversation she wasn't meant to hear, one of his executives coldly suggesting that Nathaniel's project was becoming a distraction. That word, project, cut her deeply. That night, Claire packed her things without telling him. She left a note, "Thank you for everything. But I won't be a burden to your future." Nathaniel came back to an empty apartment. For a man who had lost people before, this pain was new. Sharper, deeper. He called her, but the number was disconnected. He tried her cousin's address in Atlanta, but Claire wasn't there. She had vanished like a dream. He shut down meetings, canceled travel, and flew across the country just to search for a woman who had never asked for anything but kindness. 3 weeks later, he found her. She was working in a tiny diner off a highway in North Carolina, wiping tables and saving tips in a jar labeled Mika's Future. Her hair was tied back, her uniform stained, but she stood with dignity. She looked stunned when she saw him walk in, wearing jeans instead of a suit, holding a small bouquet of dandelions Micah used to love picking. "I didn't want to ruin your life," she whispered. "You didn't ruin it," he said quietly. "You gave it meaning." They didn't argue. They didn't rush. They sat outside the diner until nightfall, talking like they had on that first flight. He told her he had stepped down from his company, not because she asked, but because he wanted to live a life where love mattered more than shareholders. Claire cried that night, not from sadness, but from disbelief that someone had chosen her. They didn't go back to Seattle or Atlanta. They started somewhere new, somewhere neither of them had history or pain. Claire opened her mobile salon, funded not by charity, but by a partnership built on respect. Nathaniel launched a nonprofit for single parents trying to restart their lives. Micah started preschool, proudly calling Nathaniel, "Dad," to anyone who'd listen. The three of them, once strangers on a plane headed in the wrong direction, became a family that defined its own compass. And years later, when people asked how Claire and Nathaniel met, they would smile and say, "We boarded the wrong flight, and landed exactly where we were meant to be." If this story moved you even a little, please consider giving it a like, sharing it with someone who believes in love and resilience, and subscribing to Royal Stories. Speech balloon. And one last heartfelt request. If you believe that even broken people deserve a beautiful chapter, drop a comment below that says, "Love finds its way." Let's remind the world that no story is over too soon.